Okay, we're rocking and rolling.
All right, there we go. Howdy, folks, and welcome to our TMN Tuesday May event. I'm going to kick it over to Hannah and let her get us started. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone. We, of course, today have stewardship lessons from Aldo Leopold, and Mary Pearl will introduce our wonderful speaker later on in this short set of slides that we have for y'all today. But just a quick reminder for our TMN Tuesday, we have our virtual meeting room etiquette. As you can see, it's 12:01 now according to my clock, but we start these as promptly at 12 as we possibly can. If you are experiencing any issues with your WebEx account, we have a help guide on our website, and Mary Pearl will be dropping that link in the chat as well. So any issues that you're having, you can go there and see if you can get those figured out. As you might have noticed, you are muted, but you do have the option to use the chat feature. So throughout the presentation, go ahead and ask any questions that you have in the chat. And Mary Pearl and I will ask them of Steve at the end of his presentation. So any questions that you have, just pop them in there. Any conversations you want to have, just pop them in there. Just make sure to check your spelling and grammar as you put them in so we understand what you're saying. And we'll get those questions answered at the end. This will run for about an hour, and as you heard, it is being recorded. That recording will be added to our TMN Tuesday webpage. You can use that QR code to get there, or just go to our website, and it is one of those top tabs that you will see. All recordings are posted there at least by the end of the week, typically, usually by the next day, but not always. We get a little busy around here. But just know that you can either join us live for the whole event or watch that recording back. And if you have to leave early, you can always go and watch that recording for any little bits that you might have missed at the end. And also, just a link that we have for a survey on the Parks and Wildlife side of things. It's a voluntary survey that you can take if you'd like to, but it helps support events like this. And just put for location of where you're viewing this, just put the county that you are in currently or reside in. All right, and now it's on Mary Pearl. You're muted, Mary Pearl.
Unmute myself. There we go. I dropped the link in the chat and I forgot to unmute myself. A few quick reminders for our statewide Master Naturalist program here. We have a great funding program in partnership with HEB, with applications open now for our Pollinators for Texas project awards. Your chapter can apply for up to $4,000 of pollinator habitat conservation funding for projects on the ground. HEB as a partner for the Master Naturalist program is seeking to really make a difference in pollinator habitat conservation across Texas. So those applications are available now on our website and are due on June 1st. If you have not talked about it as a chapter, I encourage you to talk about it as a chapter and seek some projects that you and think about some projects that you may want to put together for this opportunity. If you'll go to the next slide. The next big announcement from the state office is encouraging you to save the date for our upcoming annual meeting. This is our once a year statewide conference for all Master Naturalists across the state of Texas and is open to the public to attend. But it happens typically about the third week in October. This year it will be October 16th through the 19th in College Station, Texas. It is a great 3-day event to totally geek out with your fellow Master Naturalist, get all of your advanced training hours in one weekend, see some great field sessions and some great tours around the area of the College Station, Brazos Valley area. On a call earlier today, and we've got a great lineup for you of some field sessions in the works. So really excited about that. Our call for proposals is open now for speakers. If you've got some speakers that you may want to hear at this year's annual meeting, I encourage you to share the website with them. And then last but not least, stay tuned and stay updated with all things annual meeting on our website. That link is going to be in the chat here in just a second. And all announcements will be made on our annual meeting. About our annual meeting will be made on our TMN listserv. our email listserv and on our social media pages. So keep watch as more information comes available for conference planning. All right. Last but not least, we're going to get into the topic for today and introduce Steve Nelle. Steve and I have known each other for several years now, but he has been a father of natural resource management in Texas for nearly 4 decades, working for the Natural Resource Conservation Service for over 35 plus years. Steve, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
For 35 plus years, an author, contributor, an active member of many of our conservation organizations across Texas, and a huge force for land stewardship in Texas with a series of articles and books written on the topic as well. So excited to have Steve here today to talk about stewardship lessons from Aldo Leopold and their application here in Texas. And without further ado, Steve, we're going to get you sharing your screen so that you can share your presentation today.
Thank you, Mary Pearl and Hannah. And so we're just going to start right off, but I want to begin this just by saying how much appreciation and respect I have for the Master Naturalist movement and for all the chapters. And I've had a good relationships with several chapters over the years. So this is going to be about stewardship lessons from Aldo Leopold, and I'm going to be following pretty much the contents of this book recently released by Texas A&M Press in December of this last year. And I really need to thank several people who made this book possible. David Langford and Andy Sansom each wrote a foreword to the book. I'm very appreciative for their support and their encouragement. Ileana Pena, who many of you know, formerly with Audubon, wrote the introduction. She brings a lot of value to the book and has a different audience than what I typically reach. And then my old college buddy, Wyman Menzer, provided the color photography. So without these people, really the book would never have happened. I'm trying to X out of something here. Okay, there we go. And then I've had the privilege of working with lots and lots and lots of landowners for the last 49 years. And here's a subsample. These are not just ranchers, they are naturalists, they are land stewards, they're some of my mentors, and they showed me what land stewardship really and truly looks like out on the land, not just in a book or a textbook or a seminar. So I'm indebted to these people and lots of others like them. The book, it has 7 chapters, as you see there. And those 7 chapters are divided into lessons, 55 lessons in all. Each lesson is pretty short and concise, and it starts with a quote or a passage from Aldo Leopold, and then followed by some of my thoughts and commentary, the ways that I have seen that lesson out in the field in Texas, on Texas ranches and farms and rural properties. So each lesson will be a quote from Leopold, followed by sort of the way I see that lesson playing out. Here's some of the names of some of the lessons, just to sort of give you a taste of the flavor of the book a little bit. That one, I'm going to let you read the book to find out what it's all about. Leopold's Repentance, Out of Kilter. Each of those lessons were previously published by the Texas Wildlife Association in their monthly magazine, Texas Wildlife. So I'm indebted to TWA for giving me the chance, starting back in 2013, to present this information to their readers. So we learn about Aldo Leopold basically from the written record that he has left behind. And he wrote 2 books, which you may be familiar with one or both of them. One is a textbook on wildlife management, the first text ever written on that subject. And the other one, a Sand County Almanac, is kind of the Bible of land stewardship, you might say. And much of the information and the ideas in my book come from a Sand County Almanac, which is about the relationship between people and the land. But there's a lot of Leopold's writings that were never published. And so since his death, many other books have been written that include some of his previously unpublished essays. And these are some of the books that I consulted as I tried to get to know Aldo Leopold. I recommend these to you. Each one of them is valuable and interesting. And so if you're looking to add to your library, these are some books about Leopold that I would recommend. If you really want to dig in deep, you can get his 600-page biography written by Dr. Kurt Mine. And Dr. Mine also helped me with the book. And then the ultimate source about Leopold is from his archives. Everything he wrote, his diaries, his journals, his manuscripts, his class notes, have been preserved by the University of Wisconsin in their digital collection, which is available free of charge online, or you can access those archives through the Aldo Leopold Foundation. So it's easy to find out about Aldo Leopold and what he believed and what he did. So who is Aldo Leopold? I want to give you a very brief photographic biography of the man based from some of his pictures. Leopold was trained in forestry, the production of trees for commercial timber production. And he always had an interest in trees all the way through his life, planting trees with his family on their little farm in Wisconsin. And it was just a very important part of his life. When he got out of Yale in the forestry school, they sent him to New Mexico and Arizona to work for the U.S. Forest Service. And you can see there's his mode of transportation during those days, where he learned the interaction or the interdependence of land for timber production, wildlife management, grazing, watershed management, and how he saw all these things merging together. So that was a very important part of his biography. Leopold was an avid hunter, capitalized, avid. There's young Leopold with a bunch of ducks. He's hunting woodcocks with one of his students. Leopold and his dogs and his shotgun. That's what a lot of people would remember about Leopold. Hunting ducks, taking his children hunting with him, even at a very young age. When he wasn't hunting, he was fishing. It didn't matter whether it was a cane pole or a fly rod. That didn't matter. And whether he was hunting or fishing or none of the above, he was enjoying the outdoors. Here with his wife, Estella, who was also a very avid naturalist and outdoor person. She is very responsible for Leopold's success. She created the kind of environment where Leopold could really thrive. And a lot of credit goes to Leopold's wife, Estella. Here he's practicing archery with one of his sons. And when he wasn't hunting or fishing, he had binoculars around his neck. And he was a very avid and skilled birder. He banded thousands and thousands of birds on their farm. So really, he's an outdoor guy. He's a true naturalist. Here's a picture of Leopold, his wife, and two of their 5 children. He was very, very engaged in the lives of his children. He was a scientist. He didn't just hunt and fish and enjoy. He studied and he measured and he quantified and he tried to figure out how things work in nature. He was the first professor of wildlife management in the entire country, being hired by the University of Wisconsin. And so he has he spent some time in his office and in the laboratory for sure, but his main classroom was outside, was outdoors, here teaching some of his students about the techniques of what we now call prescribed burning. He was an avid or a prolific writer. He wrote down everything he did, and it's preserved for you and I to go back and see that, what he wrote down. And he took time to think. He would stop whatever he was doing. Here he was hunting in Mexico for deer, but he takes time to sit down and just contemplate, to enjoy nature, to contemplate man's relationship to the land. So, who was Aldo Leopold? He was all of these things. He was a naturalist, just like you. He was a birder, a botanist, a hunter, a fisherman, very devoted family man. He was a scientist. He was a landowner. He was a professor. He was an educator. He was an author. And he took time to think. And he was a really probably the finest philosopher about land and nature that I know of. So now I want to move into sort of some of the lessons in the book. And this is the cover photo of the book. It's from the Chinati Mountains in West Texas. And the first lesson I want to talk about is called The Balance of Nature. So I'm just going to read a little bit of what Leopold said and a little bit of what I wrote in response. And we'll go through about 15 of these lessons very quickly. So Leopold wrote that the balance of nature is a mental image. It's not a perfect balance like we sometimes think of, where everything is pristine. This concept, this mental image, has both merits and defects, according to Leopold. And we know that a balanced natural system is one in which all necessary parts are retained and their movements stay within normal limits. Normal disturbances are easily accommodated, and when more severe disturbances occur, the system becomes temporarily impaired. So we see a balance in this picture, and we see here that the balance of nature is dynamic. It's not stable or static. It's always moving, just like this river is cutting and filling and moving. So the balance of nature is dynamic, not static. And this is the aftermath of one of the great wildfires in the Texas Panhandle. That's part of the balance. That is part of the balance of nature. This terrible drought we see pictured here is part of the balance. So we like to think of it sometimes as pristine and perfect and beautiful, but that's not the way nature is. The balance of nature is a useful concept, even if it does not fully explain the intricacies of ecological systems. And of course, the key for landowners is to continually strive to manage in sync with the natural balance rather than trying to overpower nature. The next lesson I want to talk about is called ecological face powder. And here's what Leopold wrote. Today, the honey-colored hills that flank the northwestern mountains derive their color not from the rich and useful bunch grasses and wheatgrass, which once covered them, but from the inferior cheatgrass, which has replaced these native grasses. The cause of the substitution is overgrazing. When too great of herds and flocks chewed and trampled the hide off the foothills, something had to cover the raw, eroding earth. Cheatgrass did. And so this lesson is about ruined complexions and how sometimes these exotic invasive grasses act sort of like face powder to try to cover a damaged landscape. Face powder does not enhance beauty. It merely hides defects. And likewise, exotic grasses superficially cover up these defective landscapes on which the native plants and grasses have been damaged. Cheatgrass and other exotic grasses do not destroy the beauty, of healthy native grasslands. Rather, they colonize, establish, and increase in places that have already been damaged. So in this picture here, from the hill country, we see a damaged, defective landscape. It's been overcleared, it's been overgrazed, and now KR bluestem has invaded, and that's what you see there. It could be layman's love grass, it could be buffalo grass, it could be one of a dozen or so exotic grasses that now sometimes dominate our landscapes. And one of the important principles of ecology and land management is the law of unintended consequences. These exotic grasses that sometimes dominate the landscape were imported with good intentions for beneficial purposes. No one suspected that these grasses would one day occupy millions of acres, damaging native plant diversity and wildlife habitats. The side effects were not anticipated. And we see evidence of this lesson really all over the place. Next lesson, this is one of my friends who owns and manages ranches in West Texas. And this lesson is called Our Relation to the Land. And here's what Leopold wrote. It is inconceivable to me that an ethical relation to land can exist without love, respect, and admiration for land, and a high regard for its value. And I guarantee this buddy of mine named Frank loves his land, and he respects it and he values it. A genuine land steward views the land from the heart and with the mind simultaneously, with both feeling and logic. Love of the land is primarily an emotional response, but this love always expresses itself in concrete ways and is demonstrated in how the land is treated. It is impossible to love the land and yet abuse or neglect it. And then this picture also reminds me of another lesson called Limiting Our Freedom. And here's what Leopold wrote. He said, an ethic, ecologically, is a limitation of freedom of action. Well, most of us do not like to have our freedoms limited in any way. But for the private landowner who is also a land steward, there is a well-developed sense of personal limitation that exists alongside the exercise of his freedom and independence. The two ideas are not incompatible. Call them scruples, qualms, or convictions. These are the inner principles that guide our management, and they include a definite set of personal restrictions regarding what we may and may not do with our land. And my buddy Frank here, he limits his freedom because of his love for the land. He only does those things which are going to be in the long term, good and profitable for the land. And then it also reminds me of a third lesson called landowner obligation. So Leopold wrote this: the average citizen, especially the landowner, has an obligation to manage his land in the interest of the community as well as his own interest. The nation needs and has a right to expect the private landowner to use his land with foresight, skill, and regard for the future. Over and over again throughout his life, Leopold spoke well of landowners who voluntarily took good care of the soil, water, plants, and animals. And he spoke poorly of landowners who do not take care of their land. He was honest about all of that. But he never spoke of forcing landowners to carry out good management. And because Leopold knew that you cannot successfully mandate good ethics or good behavior. So these are some of the important attributes of the land steward. And that Leopold wrote a great deal about these things. And it's not just about guys in cowboy hats raising cows. It's about grandma teaching her grandchild about flowers and bees and butterflies So it looks a lot of different ways in different settings. The next lesson I want to talk about is called social stigma. And here's what Leopold wrote. There is as yet no social stigma in the possession of a gullied farm, a wrecked forest, or a polluted stream, provided the dividends suffice to send the youngsters to college. So Leopold wrote that in 1938. And in those days, land was considered a commodity, just a way to make a living without regard for sustainability or conservation. It was just there to plow it and plant it, graze it, and those kind of things. And Leopold lamented that. Much has changed since those days. Today, as a result of widespread conservation efforts, grasslands are in better condition, farms are more productive with less erosion, forests are more stable and vigorous, creeks and rivers are healthier, and things are in much better shape than they were when Leopold wrote that. And we are seeing an increased ethic of responsible land stewardship. I've seen it just in my lifetime working with landowners for these 49 years. However, there is still today some uncomfortable truth in Leopold's words about gullied farms and polluted streams. In some places, there still appears to be little or no shame or disgrace when land is mistreated. And so there's a lot of room for improvement still. We're making progress, but still a long way to go. And Leopold thought that there should be some kind of social pressure amongst landowners and farmers and ranchers um, that would urge each other to treat the land well. And we're seeing that in some places. It's actually happening just as he predicted. The next lesson I want to talk about is entitled When the Wells Went Dry. So Leopold wrote this in 1939. In the drought of the 30s, when the wells went dry, everybody learned that water, like roads and schools, is community property. Well, we're seeing that now, aren't we? We're seeing wells go dry in these last 10 or 15 years when we've had some droughts. Fast forward to now, we now have many more wells than in Leopold's day, much greater water demand, and far greater pumping capacity, yet the total supply of water is the same. Simple arithmetic dictates that a finite supply of water cannot be infinitely pumped. When pumping exceeds recharge, bad things happen. And this lesson reinforces an important truth that landowners and society must embrace. Water is a shared resource. Community property, though, is different than private property, and it's harder to manage. When something is community property, it belongs to everyone, yet no one. There's a reduced sense of personal responsibility in caring for these shared resources. Well, we've got some good rains recently, but our trend has been um, somewhat droughty over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and we have no control over how much it rains or where it rains. But we do have some control over how much of that rain soaks in and how much of it is recharged. And we certainly have control over how much we extract from underground. So we have responsibility, even though we don't have total control over the water cycle. And it's definitely a lesson we all have to take extremely seriously. And it's going to take a deeper sense of these conservation ethics on all our parts. The next lesson I want to talk about, and I'm turning my pages in my book to read these sections, so bear with me here. Okay, it's called Pure Fire of Intellect, and what you see there is a a nest of bobwhite quail just starting to hatch. So here's what Leopold wrote. Conservation is keeping the resource in working order. In a surprising number of men, there burns a curiosity about machines and loving care in their construction, maintenance, and use. This bent for mechanisms, even though clothed in greasy overalls, is often the pure fire of intellect. It is the earmark of our times. Everyone knows this, but what few realize is that an equal bent for the mechanisms of nature is a possible earmark of some future generation. Well, again, that prediction has come true um, because um, I'm having a weird message come up on my screen, so bear with me just a minute. My computer wants to give an update to my printer. So
Inevitably, that always happens while you're presenting, doesn't it, Steve?
yeah, okay, so I guess we're back on here.
You're back. We can see it.
Pardon me for that. So here he is predicting that just like the mechanics of the 1930s who loved machines and knew how to take care of them, there's going to become a group of people who have that same interest in brilliance and intellect in the mechanisms of the land. And that's what you guys represent. Master naturalists, that's what you're doing. You're learning about this stuff and you're putting it into practice. The mechanisms of the land are also complex, even more complex than any machine. Every part of the land is somehow tied to the other parts, but those links and relationships are often invisible. Nevertheless, the pieces must mesh and coordinate for balanced, productive, and sustainable operation. The land mechanic understands the practical connections between soil, water, plants, animals, and how these are affected and maintained by our management. And so Leopold envisioned that some future generation might emerge a skilled group of people, again, that's you, with a special knack for understanding and taking care of the land. And then this same picture sort of illustrates the next lesson called the basic skill. And here's what Leopold wrote, 1939. The basic skill of the wildlife manager is to diagnose the landscape, to discern and predict trends in its biotic community, and to modify them where necessary in the interest of conservation. To appraise the landscape, the student must know its component parts and something of their interrelationships. That is to say, he must know its plants, its animals, its soils, its waters, and something of their interdependence, their successions, and their competitions. And again, that's exactly what Master Naturalist is all about, trying to understand the complexities of all of this. And it takes skill and it takes intellect. It is a high calling to faithfully carry out long-term stewardship responsibilities on a piece of land. For some, it's a life's work. The work is complex and challenging, but also rewarding, personally satisfying, and beneficial to society. The next lesson I want to highlight is called a positive exercise of skill. And if you've never seen 10,000 sandhill cranes get up from their morning roost, it's something you really should try to see. It's just one of the most dramatic things you can experience. So here's what Leopold wrote, 1939. Conservation is a positive exercise of skill, not merely a negative exercise of abstinence. So Leopold believed in conservation, not just preservation. He understood that the hands-off approach is not usually the best way to conserve wildlife, water, forests, or grasslands. The idea of a nature preserve or wildlife sanctuary without active management may sound appealing to one who does not understand natural resources, but it is short-sighted and idealistic. Leopold said that conservation requires the exercise of skill and insight, and this necessarily includes an understanding of ecology, natural resource science, and land management. So it's not just a hands-off approach, let nature take its course. It's active management. It's a positive exercise of skill, not just letting things go the way they will. And so with this guiding ethics of stewardship, many landowners nowadays are striving to find the sweet spot where natural resources are protected and enhanced while at the same time maintaining economic productivity and producing benefits for society. So what you see there in front of you, the management of sandhill cranes and waterfowl, it's a exercise of skill. It requires skill to manage. It requires skill to manage land for the production of deer or pronghorn or big game or songbirds. It takes skill to sustain the forest and yet still derive benefits and products from the forest. It requires skill to sustain the grasslands and still produce food and agricultural products and livelihoods. So again, it's not just about hands off, let nature take its course. Uh, and it was a big deal to Leopold that the land is used and that we benefit from the land. This next lesson is called Uneasy Conservation. And here's what Leopold wrote. He says, "We lost the Flambeau, that's a river, as a logical consequence of the fallacy that conservation can be achieved easily. It cannot." In this essay, written near the end of his life, Leopold laments the loss of Wisconsin's Flambeau River when economic opportunity took precedence over the value of a natural free-flowing river. Unrestrained logging and rapid growth of the dairy industry had already taken a heavy toll on the once great forests along the Flambeau. Then in Leopold's day, a series of hydroelectric dams threatened the character of the river. Leopold and his allies lost their battle to block the damming of the river's last remaining natural stretch. It was a bitter reminder that big wins for conservation are not easily achieved, and the losses are often far-reaching and sometimes irreversible. And so this picture here is from the Texas Hill Country, and we have some of those same pressures now, but greatly increased beyond what Leopold saw. There, we still have people that want to build dams on rivers. We still have people uh, over extracting groundwater, which sustains the base flow of some of these rivers. We still have people in communities that want to release their treated sewage effluent into these rivers. And so some things are worth fighting for. And as our population grows and as cities and towns encroach into the countryside, there will be more and more roads, pipelines, power lines, energy development, sewage treatment plants, landfills, gravel mines, commercial development. These things take a toll ecologically, aesthetically, and culturally, just as the hydroelectric dams did in Leopold's day. How much are we willing to lose? Is unrestrained economic development worth the cost it extracts on the natural world? And that's a question that you and I must face as Texas conservationists. It's very sobering to see what we're losing. The next lesson is called Self-Portrait. And Leopold wrote this: The landscape of any farm is the owner's portrait of himself. Think about that statement. It's very profound. Leopold says that the landscape of a farm, ranch, or forest is a true reflection of the owner's personality and values. The artwork inscribed on the land by the owner reveals much about the owner or manager of that land. All landowners create a kind of self-portrait with the type of management they apply to the land. It's a very strange relationship how closely intertwined the person becomes with their land. It's as if when you see the land, you see the person. And when you see the person, you see that the land is part of them. It's a very strange and interesting dynamic. Likewise, this grassland in the rolling plains of Texas, this is a portrait of the owner. It reflects the owner's priorities and values. This river bottom is a portrait of the owner. It reflects who they really are and what their values are. Unfortunately, this field, this eroding field, is also a portrait of the owner. That erosion is preventable. It happened by carelessness or apathy. So the land that we are in charge of really does reflect who we are. The next lesson is entitled The Practitioner of Conservation. And so here's what Leopold wrote. It has always been admitted that several kinds of conservation should be integrated with each other and with other economic land uses. The theory is that one and the same oak will grow saw logs, bind soil against erosion, retard floods, drop acorns to game, furnish shelter for songbirds, and cast shade for picnics. That one and the same acre can and should serve forestry, watersheds, wildlife, and recreation simultaneously. The plain lesson is that to be a practitioner of conservation on a piece of land takes more brains and a wider range of sympathy, forethought, and experience than to be a specialized forester, game manager, range manager, or erosion expert. Integration is easy on paper, but a lot more important and more difficult in the field than any of us foresaw. And he wrote that in 1934. Leopold reminds us that every plant has multiple values. Grass is not just for grazing. Shrubs are not just for berries, cover, or browse. Every acre of land has multiple purposes and benefits. We may view a pasture as providing quail habitat and cattle forage, but if it is properly managed, it is also providing watershed protection, groundwater recharge, biodiversity, songbird habitat, pollinator habitat, carbon sequestration, and other vital natural services. And the final lesson is that all of this is easy to talk about and put on paper, but it's difficult to actually apply on a farm or ranch. And so it makes you sympathize with people who are making their living off of the land. They have to be concerned not just with ecological integrity, but also economic realities. This next lesson, second to last, is called Private Lands, Public Interest. And so here's what Leopold wrote. Every landowner is the custodian of two interests, not always identical, the public and his own. What we need is a positive inducement or reward for the landowner who respects both interests in his actual land practice. Conservation will ultimately boil down to rewarding the private landowner who conserves the public interest. And how true that is. In a private land state, we're aware of that. The general public does not know very much about wildlife management, watershed management, range management, or soil conservation, or wetland management. But everyone depends on the benefits accrued from these pursuits. Every citizen, no matter how far removed from the land, relies on clean water that originates primarily on ranch lands and forests. Everyone benefits when the soil is healthy and kept in place by a good cover of grass or trees. Nearly everyone appreciates the myriad species of birds, mammals, reptiles, butterflies, grasses, wildflowers, shrubs, and trees. In Texas, all of these depend on private land. The fancy name that describes the combined societal values of well-managed land is ecosystem services. It includes the sum total of all the positive things that are produced, provided, or sustained on healthy lands. And so here we see a picture of a lady fly fishing on the Llano River. The water in the Llano River originates on private lands. It's processed by those lands, both as base flow and spring flow and runoff. And so there's definitely a public interest. People enjoy the rivers and whether it's fishing or whatever, but it originates and is dependent upon how private lands are managed. By the way, in this picture from Wyman Menzer, the guy in that canoe that's paddling the canoe is John Graves, the author of Goodbye to a River and Hardscrabble and some other books that would be of interest to you. Likewise, we appreciate the vast estuary systems along the Texas coast, miles and miles and miles, hundreds of miles of these, with great public benefits in the form of habitat for estuary species and wildlife and fish and oysters and shrimp. But again, all this water originates hundreds of miles away on private land. And so the way that every acre is managed affects the land and water somewhere else. And it's a lesson we have to keep in mind no matter what. Final lesson for our series today is called A Land to Please Everyone. Here's how it starts, what Leopold is saying. When the cows were first turned out upon the hills, everything was all right because there were more hills than cows, and because the soil still retained the humus which the wilderness vegetation had built up. The trout streams ran clear, deep, narrow, and full. They seldom overflowed. The deep loam of even the steepest fields and pastures showed never a gully, being able to soak up any rain as it came and turn it upward into crops or downward into perennial springs. It was a land to please everyone, be he an empire builder or a poet. And Leopold wrote that in 1935. Leopold describes here the conditions of the Coon Valley watershed in west central Wisconsin. And the description you just read was from the middle to late 19th century, 1800s, just as the land was beginning to be developed for dairy farming. It's a beautiful description of natural resource abundance, balance, and stability. But the story continues. By the early 1900s, the rapidly expanding dairy herds were taking a toll on Coon Valley. The prairies were grazed off. The once rich timberlands were cut to make room for more pasture. By the time Leopold wrote this in 1935, the land had deteriorated into something sad and unrecognizable. He wrote, "Gone now is the humus of the old prairie, which enabled the ridges to take on the rains as they came. Every rain now pours off the ridges as from a roof. The ravines of the grazed slopes are the gutters. In their overpastured condition, they cannot resist the abrasion of the silt-laden torrents. Great gashing gullies are now torn out of the hillsides. Each gully dumps its load of hillside rocks upon the fields in the creek bottom, and the muddy waters into the already swollen streams. It's the sad story of natural resource exploitation, and it's true in Wisconsin and in every corner of our country. It's true for pretty much every part of Texas, is how we fail to understand uh, anything about conservation in those early days. There was terrible exploitation and degradation. And so this is part of our history as humans, to not treat the land very well. But the story doesn't end there. The Coon Valley watershed later became one of the first cooperative watershed conservation projects in the country. The Soil Erosion Service, which later became the Soil Conservation Service, embarked on an ambitious program of technical and financial assistance with willing farmers. It was a voluntary partnership between conscientious landowners and locally led government assistance. It did not happen overnight, and there were many mistakes and setbacks, but little by little, the grasses returned to hold the soil in place and to capture the rainfall. The steeper slopes were returned to trees. The creeks were fenced to allow protection and proper grazing of streamside vegetation. Today, Coon Valley is home to blue ribbon trout streams, stable hillsides, productive agriculture, and natural beauty. And these pictures are from Coon Valley, and it shows how nature can be very resilient with the right kind of management, and the mistakes of the past can be um, overcome. It takes a lot of dedication. It takes money. It takes an understanding of all of these things that Leopold talked about. Well-managed land is the proverbial win-win for everyone, whether rural residents or city dwellers. It's beautiful enough to inspire poets and productive enough to generate returns for the owner, which in turn sustain families and communities. Along with all these benefits are good wildlife, good fish, good water, all perpetually renewable. These are the results of genuine stewardship. Well, I felt like I haven't done a great job of explaining what Leopold was all about, but stewardship is really about who a person is on the inside. It's about their values, their motivations, and their attitudes toward the land. This book is about man's relationship to the land, that close connection with the land between a person and a farm or a ranch. And again, it's not just about old guys in cowboy hats. It can look like this or 100 different ways, but it's about that relationship and connection. So I want to end here with a tribute first to the land, a thing of great value, a thing of great beauty. Here's to the things that we derive from the land, whether it be clean water, whether it be agriculture and livelihoods, whether it be wildlife. And here's to the people who are the voluntary stewards of farms and ranches, the people who take that obligation seriously, and put into practice those things that Leopold wrote about. And then here's to Mr. Leopold and the things that he wrote about, 80, 90 years ago, things which are still true today and which we can put into practice every day, whether we have a backyard or a few acres or a large farm or ranch. And then finally, let me end with a tribute to you guys, to the master naturalist. Each chapter, each individual, the leaders of the chapters, you're doing a wonderful job of educating and teaching each other about how to understand the land. And then that understanding can be used to help people treat the land better, the way that we know it should be treated. So that concludes a quick and dirty overview of this book. And I want to thank you for tuning in. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and ask if there's any comments or questions or anything.
There's
like
been lots
that.
of comments, but certainly no questions that I've seen so far, or the questions have been internally discussed. There's been a lot of kudos and a lot of thanks, Steve. I think the timing of this presentation in the ever-changing world of conservation right now has been really inspiring and really meaningful for a lot of our master naturalists. We're hearing that in the chat. There's a lot of kudos to you here, folks saying this is, you know, why they've become a master naturalist is to be part of that program of stewardship to their communities and to the resources around them. So I appreciate your recognition of the master naturalist because they really are what is making a change in Texas.
Yeah.
For sure.
I have a question. How many total master naturalists are there in Texas?
That is a hard number to pin down exactly because it does fluctuate slightly, but we're about 7,000 members
Okay.
active right now across Texas.
That's wonderful. And it's not all that old of organization.
27 years, not that old at all.
Well, my kudos to all of you, each and every one of you.
Absolutely. Here's a great question, and I think it builds off of kind of the sentiment that we're feeling is, how do you seek and do you feel optimism in the land stewardship in Texas? So how do you look to the bright points, and how do you find those?
Well, so how do you look to the positive? So I've been working with landowners for almost 50 years, and I've seen it myself. I've seen a change. I've seen a change in the landscape, in the way that ranches and farms look, and I've seen a change of attitude amongst the owners. And it's to me, it's pretty obvious because I've been seeing it for almost 5 decades. And there's still a long way to go, but there's plenty to be excited about and encouraged about. Uh, Places that used to be just barren, overgrazed, eroding hillsides, now I see a grass cover. Not everywhere, and not as good as it needs to be, but it's easy for me to be optimistic. And yeah, we have challenges, but there's a lot of reason to be um, pleased at the trend.
Another question I think that wasn't specifically asked in the chat, but was discussed quite a bit was how to engage this topic with our next generation of land stewards, how to take these types of messages and make them relevant and impactful and meaningful and engaging with young people in Texas.
So just yesterday, I was with a group of 7 high school graduates from Ira Ann High School. You may have never heard of Ira Ann, but it's out in West Texas on the banks of the Pecos River. And so there's not a lot to do in Ira Ann.
Mm-hmm.
The teachers and the parents have to be very intentional about creating things for these young people to do. And so they kayaked a little bit on the Pecos River, and then we had a lunch together. And I showed them my personal copy of a Sand County Almanac and
Well
how
said.
it's tattered and worn. And I challenged them to read it. And I challenged them that perhaps even one or two of them might want to pursue um, hydrology or land management or conservation. And so these young people, these seniors, they seem to be really pleased to be out on the river. It's not the pristine paddling experience like you're going to find on the Frio or something, but it's what they have. And so I told them my story of how in 1971, my high school teacher made us do a book report. and I picked a Sand County Almanac. And so it's pretty much changed my direction in life ever since. And so I think we just have to become engaged with our 4-H groups and our FFA and just the kids in our community.
And finding ways to put them onto some of the private property or public lands in Texas, and showcasing the stewardship actions that have been done by our biologists, our natural resource conservationists, our master naturalists.
Yes.
I agree. I have one last question for you. There's a few other questions that we're just not going to get to because there's just not enough time in the day to listen to you. Actually, I have 2 questions for you. Sorry. I'll start with the easy one. The easy one, Steve, is will you come to our annual meeting in October, to the Master Naturalist Conference in October?
Well, maybe.
Maybe. Okay. We'll get it on your calendar. We'll work on it.
It takes a lot for me to go that far. But it's something we can definitely talk about, and I'd be open to visiting with you about that.
Lots of master naturalists in the chat are really really happy to encourage you to come to
Maybe
College
so.
Station.
Yeah.
And then the second and the last question that we'll ask, kind of tying it back to how you opened up with the history of Aldo Leopold and talking through his biography. There was an interesting question in the chat about some of his direct experiences in Texas. And I don't remember you talking about that. Did he visited the King Ranch?
Yes, right. The year before he died, in fact, several months before he died, he made a visit to the King Ranch at the invitation of Val Lehman
Mm-hmm.
and Robert Clayburgh, and he spent, I think, several days there. And I write about that in a bit in the chapter 1.
Okay.
And he was very impressed. He was extremely impressed about what he saw on the King Ranch, and he was going to incorporate that into his class, his wildlife management class. And of course, he died before he got a chance to do that. And he sort of chastised them on their aggressive predator control. And he got them to stop killing mountain lions. This was way back when that was just the common, normal thing that everybody did. And he got the Clayburgh family and the King Ranch to just stop killing mountain lions. And so he noticed some things that, he thought needed a little bit of improvement. But he was extremely complimentary, and he wrote some of his notes, some of his letters back to the King Ranch are in those archives.
Wow.
Very
Okay.
valuable.
Some more history digging that we'll have to do to see some of that. How interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for all of your time today and all of your lessons and your years of experience that you've brought to the program. Like I said, there has just been nothing but kudos in the chat from the 400 plus master naturalists that were listening with us today. So really appreciate that.
Well, thank all of you. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. All right. And if y'all are new to the TMN Tuesdays, we'll get this recording posted by the end of the day, if not first thing tomorrow, so that you can watch it again. And really, I think it's going to take a second watch to absorb some of those lessons. And we've dropped the link for Steve's book in the chat as well, so that you can find that if you want to use that as a read along as well. Thanks everybody for joining us for TMN Tuesday today.
Adios.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve, for everything. Really